Okay. Hello. I'm recording this as a response to a guy that I see in the comments a lot. It goes by the name of Anthrax. So if I swap this over, there's a conversation that we were having in regards to something I put out, automated AA long form response. And Anthrax dislikes the parallels that I make between this game or that game, and I'm trying to explain that I'm trying to reference game design concepts, basic things that game designers can recognize in this game or that game or other games. And it's very common for game designers to pull information concepts from other games. And the response that I got was, has it occurred to you that you're the one emotionally invested in this, as it's your class of choice? It would explain why you come up with all sorts of excuses or analogies that work against you, but you don't seem to get it. So I wanted to say something. In response to something he had said, he had stated its strengths for Kagero, a destroyer. Its strengths consist in its torpedoes, which can be further amplified by torpedo reload booster, but because it has no AA to speak of, that type of build is practically a no-go, because a certain class makes it impossible to not take smoke only for its survival, not team play. So, the first response is simply that you could play a torpedo reload booster destroyer in a CV game. But it comes with a very real risk because you know that the CV could spot you, attack you, deal with you. Your AA is not great, and without smoke, well, that could potentially suck. But this is still a conscious choice by a player. Just because you can use it doesn't mean that you can't choose something else. Just because you've used it doesn't mean you can't play. It just means that you have X tool instead of Y, so you have to play the game with respect to that. If you play the Pan-Asian line and you choose radar instead of smoke, there's some things you're going to be able to do and things you can't do. You can use radar, you can't use smoke. But specifically, I want to zone in on this, which was more of a response to what he said, to try to point out something as a basic fundamental concept that's wrapped into this. Your statement actually tells you something right away, because it has no AA to speak of. This means that game designers factored this actual part of the ship's capability into the gameplay. It was literally designed not to be able to protect itself from planes to any significant degree via AA mounts. In other words, the literal game designers baked the bad AA in as a weakness. If the game designers didn't want CVs in a game, they could simply remove them. AA could exist only as an art asset instead of a balancing characteristic, and the Kagero suffers no weakness from its bad AA if there isn't a CV, but does suffer from the bad AA when there is one, and has to play around that fact. I try to point out this is a conscious choice by the game designers. Now there's a response here, but I'm going to try to explain this in a bit of a different concept, maybe from a different angle. First off, though, we'll go with the World of Warships angle, and then I'm going to ask a strange question, which I'll go ahead and put here. Does World of Warships have gravity? So while you chew on that, I'm going to swap over to World of Warships, where we've got, if we look at the Mikasa, it happens to not have AA. It's a lower tech tree ship. It's tier 2. Hopefully it never sees a CV, although it might. But as we start going up the tech lines, Isakaze has AA. It's terrible, but it's got it. If this is modeled off the realism of the whatever, this could simply be an art asset as opposed to a port characteristic telling you what it has as terms of strengths. Very great concealment. Really shitty AA. In fact, it's its worst stat if you look at these in terms of stat points. But let's look at this different game, this big hunt mode. Are there any AA stats in Big Hunt? There's not on the Valkyrie. There's not on the Gale. There's not on the Heracles. There's not on the Hector. There's not on the Avenger. Why? There's no CVs in Big Hunt. Now there are, if you look, little assets or something that they could have, which could represent AA that they choose to put on these. Maybe these weird little laser cannons or something happen to have something to do with AA. Also, they probably sell skins like these for relevant ships, and those relevant ships have AA. But even though it's an art asset that exists on the models in the game, it has no basis in the gameplay, so they simply never added it in. So I'm just going to kind of wrap on the point. AA exists as a balancing characteristic from the actual game developers. When they're concepting a ship, that's one of the points of balance that they're using. So now we're going to address the argument of, well, if a ship has AA in real life, then you need to model the AA needs to be there. But again, if carriers weren't in the game, the only thing I could even begin to imagine that AA interacting with is shooting down a spotter plane, because you wouldn't need fighters, because there would be no planes to use fighters against. So would you build an entire game mechanic around the concept of shooting down a spotter plane? But let's move to the thing that I was talking about. Does World of Warships have gravity? What does this mean? Well, it's a weird question, I'll grant you, but I think it's worth asking. Again, because if we're looking at game design balance here, if we're looking at really a game that's designed by people, you have to look at it in context of game designers are God. They literally have to create everything that's going to matter. And if it doesn't matter, they don't create it, because why would you waste your time? So first off, does World of Warships have gravity in this pursuit of realism? You've got a ship. The ship chooses to fire. For sanity's sake, let's put the water here, and I can make that thicker. This is not designed to look special. You've got your little dispersion ellipsoid out here, and you take your shot. Bam. A shell is fired, and that shell's going to go out and start to dip down and come down. This looks like a realistic shot. But is there gravity? No. The shell is fired, the endpoint is determined, and then there's a calculation that's modeled in with shell drag characteristics, whatever. This calculation details it all out, and then you simply have an animation that plays in the game from point A to point B. And if it happens to strike something, it rolls a characteristic check to see if there's something that occurs off that. If it happens to hit a ship, it's going to go through an armor check. It's going to go through a lot of other stuff. It doesn't factor gravity into it. It simply goes through the math on the interaction. Okay, but maybe that looks debatable. So let's talk instead of planes. Planes come by and they drop a bomb. And that bomb falls down. Maybe it actually falls at an angle and kind of does something like this. Well, again, this looks like gravity. But same with the shell. Rather than going through and modeling the actual physics of wind drag and this and all that sort of other stuff, as some simulators do, it's much easier to have a start point, an end point, and then have a little calculation, x equals y, whatever, where it's just going to tell you this is the line that it generates, and then it just models that in the game. But again, this kind of looks like gravity. So instead, we'll look at rocket planes. So when rocket planes come over and they take their shot, specifically German rocket planes are the easiest to see this. They have a very flat angle where they try to approach so that they can try and score a citadel. However, in an attempt to make the game look prettier and cooler and stuff, sometimes there's an island, and rather than having the planes fly through the island, which would be bizarre, they simply have the planes go higher. And you get to watch as planes that are up here will shoot rockets way off into the distance. The line doesn't change. There's no drop. There's no effect on it. It's simply spawned in a place, going to a place, and there's a direct straight line as the asset goes forward and does nothing else. And in fact, if you go to an extremely high position on maybe Two Brothers shooting from the top of the map, you could fire at something 20 kilometers, 25 kilometers away, and it would simply be a completely straight line from Genesis until endpoint. There is no effect on this. There's no alteration on this. They don't run out of gas. The animation doesn't change. It's just an asset moving forward in a line unaffected by anything. The best argument for gravity would be if a ship rams another ship and you get to watch it bob up or go under the water and then come back, which could be a buoyancy calculation or maybe some kind of animation on that sense. Rather than having a simple snap to a grid, it has some kind of logarithmic response. But I suppose that's a discussion for another day. Why do I talk about all this? Who the hell cares? Because, while yes, this game is based in reality, it's based on a concept of, well, these are warships. Warships do warship things. They've got these guns, they've got this AA, they've got other stuff. This is a game. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be realistic or accurate, and oftentimes from what I hear purists saying, wargaming does not do a great job at making historically perfect and accurate and whatever. Wargaming itself has stated they kind of come at it from a basic perspective of we try to do the thing like it would be represented in the game or in real life, and then we tweak it, alter it, and shift it around until it fits in the game. Radar consumables going through islands, for instance, things of this nature. Because there's a game, there's some leeway, there's some bend, but you have to assume that if it's in the game, it's because somebody sat down at a desk, typing away feverishly, entering code, and more code to put it into the game in the first place so that they could use it for some reason. And when we look at a Kagero, and this Kagero has terrible, god-awful, disgusting bad AA, which is not going to save it from a determined CV player, I'm trying to explain this is a balancing characteristic. And you don't have to worry about it when there's no CV, but you do when there is one, because it's a balancing characteristic. Anyway, have a good one.